I never thought a spilled coffee would change my life, but that's exactly what happened on that cold October morning. The universe has a twisted sense of humor that way. My name is Nora, and up until that day, my life ran like a well-oiled machine. Wake up at 5 a.m., hit the gym, grab coffee from Jerry's on 4th Street, and be at the hospital by 7 a.m. sharp. As a trauma surgeon, routine isn't just preference, it's survival. But that morning, my phone buzzed with a message from the hospital about an emergency surgery. I was power walking, coffee in hand, when I rounded the corner and slammed straight into what felt like a brick wall. My coffee exploded between us, creating a Rorschach test of caffeine across his crisp white shirt. "I am so sorry," I stammered, frantically digging through my bag for tissues. "I wasn't looking where." "Neither was I," he said, laughing. Actually laughing. Who laughs when a stranger ruins their clothes? I was too busy arguing with my mother on the phone. I looked up then, really looked at him. Tall, architect type with kind eyes and the sort of smile that made you want to trust him. He held up his phone, still showing an active call. "Mom? I'll call you back. I've just been assaulted with a hot beverage." He winked at me as he hung up, ignoring the tinny sound of protests from the other end. "I'm Asher," he said, dabbing at his shirt with the tissues I'd finally found. "And you look like you're having the kind of morning that needs a coffee replacement. Can I buy you one?" "I have surgery," I blurted out, immediately regretting how abrupt it sounded. "I mean, emergency surgery. I'm already late." A doctor." That explains the Olympic speed walking." His smile widened. "Rain check, then." Before I could think better of it, I pulled out one of my business cards and scribbled my personal number on the back. "For the dry cleaning bill," I said, handing it to him. He took the card, but his eyes stayed on mine. "You know, this means I'm definitely going to call you, right?" "I'm counting on it," I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. As I hurried away, I heard his phone ringing again. This time he let it go to voicemail. I didn't know then that the woman calling him would become my worst nightmare, or that this chance meeting would unravel everything I'd carefully built. But that's the thing about life-changing moments. They never come with warning labels. He called 3 days later, just as I was finishing a grueling 12-hour shift. I was elbow-deep in paperwork when my phone buzzed, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. "So, I tried everything to get the coffee stain out," Asher said, skipping hello entirely. "Dry cleaning baking soda. Even my mother's secret recipe involving vinegar and prayers. I think the shirt's officially a goner." I found myself smiling despite my exhaustion. "Are you calling to guilt me into buying you a new wardrobe?" "Actually, I'm calling to ask if you'd let me buy you dinner." "Seems only fair. You ruined my shirt. I ruin your diet with some amazing Italian food." That's how it started. One dinner turned into 3, then weekly dates that stretched into the early hours of the morning. Asher was different from anyone I'd dated before. He listened like someone who actually wanted to hear the answer, not just waiting for his turn to speak. But it was during our 4th date that I first noticed something odd. His phone kept lighting up with messages, which he'd glance at and ignore, his jaw tightening slightly each time. "Everything okay?" I asked as his phone buzzed for the 10th time. "Just my mother," he said, flipping the phone face down. "She likes to know where I am." "At 10:30 at night?" He laughed, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "She's protective. Has been since my sister moved to Australia. I'm all she's got left in the same time zone." I should have seen the red flag then, but I was too caught up in the way he looked at me. The way he made me forget about the weight of life and death decisions I carried every day. "Tell me about your family," he said, changing the subject. The familiar ache in my chest returned. "Not much to tell anymore. Lost my parents in a car accident 3 years ago. It's just me now." His hand found mine across the table. "I'm sorry. That must be lonely." "Sometimes," I admitted. "But I've built my own family at the hospital. My best friend Lila says I've married my job." "Well," he said, his thumb tracing circles on my palm, "maybe it's time for a little polygamy then?" Before I could respond, his phone lit up again. This time, I caught a glimpse of the message. "Asher James Caldwell, if you don't answer me right now." He quickly silenced it, but something in his expression shifted. I should probably call her back quickly, just to let her know I'm okay. As he stepped outside to make the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something more complicated than just a new relationship. I just didn't know how complicated it would get. Meeting Asher's parents wasn't my idea. After 2 months of dating, I thought we had a good thing going. Just us, no complications. But when he mentioned Sunday dinner at his parents' house, I couldn't think of a reasonable excuse to say no. "They'll love you," he assured me, squeezing my hand as we walked up the path to an imposing Victorian house. "Just maybe don't mention the coffee incident." The door opened before we reached it. Miriam Caldwell stood there, perfectly coiffed, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Nora," she said, pulling me into an unexpected hug. "Asher's told us so little about you." The emphasis on little wasn't lost on me. Inside, James Caldwell gave me a warm handshake and a genuine smile. "Don't mind Miriam," he whispered as she led Asher to the kitchen. "She's just protective." Dinner started pleasantly enough. Miriam had prepared an elaborate meal, and the conversation flowed easily until she started asking about my work. "A surgeon," she mused, swirling her wine. "Such demanding hours." "Asher mentioned you're often on call." "The schedule can be unpredictable," I admitted. "But it's rewarding work." She set down her glass. "And family? Do you plan to have children someday?" "Mom," Asher warned, but she continued. "It's a reasonable question, dear. I mean, who would raise them with such a demanding career? Asher works from home most days. He could manage, I suppose. Though it seems rather unfair." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "I haven't really." "And holidays?" "Asher's always home for holidays. All of them. It's our tradition." She reached for his hand. "Remember last Christmas, darling? When we all made those gingerbread houses." "Things change, Mom," Asher said quietly. "Do they have to?" Her voice took on a wounded tone. "First Sarah moves across the world, and now you're." She dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. James cleared his throat. "Miriam, perhaps." "No, James, these things need to be discussed. Family is everything. Surely Nora understands that." She fixed me with a penetrating stare. "Oh, but I forgot you don't have family anymore, do you?" The silence that followed was deafening. I felt Asher tense beside me, but he said nothing, just sat there, looking at his plate. "Excuse me," I managed, standing up. "I need some air." Outside, my hands shook as I pulled out my phone. 3 missed calls from the hospital, a blessing in disguise. "Emergency at work," I told Asher when he followed me out. "I have to go." "Nora, I'm sorry." "She's not usually." "Yes, she is," I cut him off. "And you let her be." I left him standing there, finally understanding that sometimes the biggest betrayals come wrapped in silence. The next week was a blur of long surgeries and longer conversations with Lila over wine. Asher called and texted constantly, apologizing, explaining, promising things would be different. I wanted to believe him. "You should see the texts his mother sends," I told Lila, scrolling through my phone. "Listen to this. Asher mentioned you're working Christmas Eve." How disappointing for him. Good thing he'll have family to comfort him. Lila grabbed my phone. That manipulative bye. "It gets better," I cut her off. "She's started showing up at his office with lunch. Every day. Because she's worried about his nutrition since he's been so distracted lately." "And what does Asher say about this?" I took a long sip of wine. "He says I'm overreacting. That she means well." The hospital pager buzzed before Lila could respond. Emergency surgery. Maybe it was cowardly, but I was grateful for the escape. The operation started routinely enough, a car crash victim with internal bleeding. But halfway through, my hands started shaking. Just slightly, but enough. Images of Miriam's smirking face kept floating through my mind, her voice echoing, "Such demanding hours." "Dr. Whitfield?" My assistant's voice snapped me back. "The bleeding's increasing." I forced myself to focus, but the damage was done. What should have been a straightforward procedure turned into a 3-hour battle. We saved the patient, but barely. And I knew, everyone in that operating room knew, it was too close. Later, staring at my reflection in the locker room mirror, my phone buzzed. A text from Miriam to Asher, accidentally sent to our group chat. "Darling, I've been thinking about Nora's career choices. As a psychologist, I worry about surgeons and God complexes. The responsibility of holding lives in your hands can be Destabilizing. We should discuss this over dinner. Before I could process this, another message popped up, Asher defending me. Mom, stop. Nora's career isn't your concern. Then Miriam. Everything about the woman who's changed my son is my concern. I only want what's best for you. I waited for Asher's response. Minutes ticked by. Nothing. My pager went off again. The post-op patient was crashing. As I ran to the ICU, my phone kept buzzing with messages from their continuing conversation. I silenced it without looking. Hours later, after stabilizing the patient, I finally checked my messages. Dozens from Asher, one from Miriam. I've invited Sarah to fly in for Christmas. Won't it be nice to have the whole family together? Just like old times. The message was clear. I wasn't part of the whole family. And maybe I never would be. I wasn't invited to the Caldwell family Christmas dinner, but I ended up there anyway. Asher had left his presentation files at my place, and despite my better judgment, I drove to his parents' house to drop them off. He needed them for a major client meeting the next day. The front door was slightly ajar when I arrived, voices drifting out into the cold December air. I should have left the files on the porch. Should have texted Asher and walked away. Instead, I heard my name and froze. She's changing you, Asher. Miriam's voice carried clearly. The son I raised would never miss family dinner for work. Would never question his mother's judgment. I'm not questioning your judgment, Mom. I'm questioning your interference in my relationship. Interference? I'm trying to protect you. Did you know she almost lost a patient last week? Your father's golf partner works at the hospital. He told us all about it. She's unstable, distracted. Is that really who you want to build a life with? My hands tightened around the files. Of course she'd found out about that surgery. That's enough. It was James's voice now, surprisingly firm. Miriam, this has gone too far. Has it? Tell them, Sarah. Tell them what you really think about the woman replacing you in your brother's life. Mom, I'm not getting involved in. See, Miriam pressed. Even your sister can see something's wrong. Asher, darling, we're having this intervention because we love you. Because we can't stand to see you throw away everything for someone who clearly doesn't understand the importance of family. I'd heard enough. I pushed the door open, making them all jump. Asher's face went pale. Sarah, who I'd never met, looked mortified. James wouldn't meet my eyes. Your files, I said, placing them on the nearest table. My voice sounded strange, distant. For tomorrow's meeting. Nora, wait. Asher started toward me. No. I held up my hand. You know what's funny? I've spent months thinking I wasn't good enough for your family. But standing here, listening to this, I finally realize you're not good enough for me. Miriam stepped forward, that familiar false concern on her face. Nora, dear, we were just. Save it. You want to protect your son? Congratulations. You win. I turned to Asher. I'm done competing with your mother for space in your life. When you're ready to be your own person, maybe you'll understand what you lost here. I walked out, ignoring Asher calling my name. In my rearview mirror, I saw him on the porch, watching me leave. He didn't try to follow. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Some wars aren't worth winning. And some loves aren't strong enough to survive the crossfire of family loyalty. 3 weeks after walking out of the Caldwell house, I was back in the operating room, focused on a complex heart surgery, when the monitors started screaming. My patient was crashing, and for a split second, I froze. Miriam's words echoed in my head, unstable, distracted. Dr. Whitfield? My assistant's voice snapped me back. I worked mechanically, my training taking over where my confidence faltered. We stabilized the patient, but afterward, I sat in the locker room, staring at my trembling hands. The chief of surgery found me there. Nora, she said, closing the door behind her. We need to talk about your recent performance. I knew it was coming. The almost mistake 3 weeks ago. Today's hesitation. The whispers from the nursing staff about my changed demeanor. I'm recommending you take a leave of absence, she said. Just a few weeks to get your head straight. I don't need. It's not a suggestion. She handed me the paperwork. We can't risk patient safety while you work through whatever's going on. I walked out of the hospital in a daze, only to find James Caldwell waiting by my car. Of all people, he was the last one I expected to see. She's destroying him too, you know, he said without preamble. Asher. He's barely eating, barely sleeping. He moved out last week. That's not my problem anymore. No, but this might be. He pulled out an envelope. Miriam's been making calls. To the hospital board. To other hospitals in the area. She's trying to hurt your career, Nora. My stomach dropped. The recent scrutiny at work suddenly made more sense. Why are you telling me this? Because I've spent 35 years watching my wife destroy relationships out of fear. Sarah moved to Australia to escape it. And now. He looked down. I enabled this. My silence made me complicit. But watching her try to ruin you professionally, I can't stay silent anymore. My phone buzzed. A text from Lila, check your email now. There it was, an anonymous email to the entire hospital staff, detailing my emotional instability and questionable judgment, complete with twisted versions of my recent cases. The sender's writing style was unmistakable. I tried to stop her, James said, watching my face. But Miriam, when she feels threatened. I laughed, a hollow sound. Threatened? By me? She won. She got what she wanted. What more does she need? Control, he said simply. Complete control. I stared at the email, then at my forced leave paperwork. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built after losing my parents, it was all unraveling because one woman couldn't bear to let her son go. Well, I said, crumpling the email printout. Let's see how she handles losing control. I found Miriam in her garden, pruning roses with the same precision she'd used to try to cut me out of Asher's life. She didn't seem surprised to see me. I wondered when you'd come, she said, setting down her shears. Though I'd hoped you'd have enough dignity to stay away. Like you had enough dignity not to send that email? I held up a yellowed envelope. Or enough dignity to let your own mother die thinking you hated her? That got her attention. James had found their grandmother's letter while cleaning out the attic, a final message to Asher explaining why she'd cut Miriam out of her will. Not because she didn't love her daughter, but because Miriam's controlling behavior had already driven away one husband and nearly destroyed her relationship with James. Where did you get that? Her voice shook slightly. Does it matter? What matters is that you're doing to Asher exactly what you did to Sarah. What your mother tried to stop you from doing to anyone else. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. I'm not here for revenge, Miriam. I'm here because someone needs to break this cycle, and it's clearly not going to be you. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Break what cycle? I protect my family. That's all I've ever done. You don't protect them. You cage them. And now you're alone in that cage, wondering why everyone keeps leaving. I am not. She stopped as footsteps crunched on the garden path. She's right, Mom. Asher stood there, looking exhausted but determined. I hadn't told him I was coming, hadn't spoken to him in weeks. I found my own copy of Grandma's letter, he said. In that box of things you told me you'd thrown away. Miriam's face went pale. Asher, I can explain. No more explanations. No more manipulation. He moved to stand beside me. I'm not choosing between you and Nora. I'm choosing myself. And if you want to be part of my life, you need to choose too, between controlling me and loving me. Miriam sank onto the garden bench, the letter trembling in her hands. For the first time, I saw past the manipulative facade to the terrified woman beneath, someone so afraid of being abandoned that she'd rather cage love than risk losing it. I don't know how to let go, she whispered. Then let us help you learn, Asher said quietly. But this time, on our terms. I looked at the roses, their thorns sharp but their blooms beautiful. Sometimes the most painful growth leads to the most stunning transformations. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's breaking the cycle that hurt you in the first place. 6 months later, I stood in the hospital corridor, staring at the board that listed my first surgery since returning from leave. My hands were steady, my mind clear. The whispers had died down, especially after Miriam's public apology email to the hospital board, part of her therapy homework, she'd said. Dr. Whitfield? A nurse approached with a fresh cup of coffee. Your patient's family is asking for you. I found them in the waiting room, Miriam and James, sitting with my patient's spouse. Miriam was holding the woman's hand, offering quiet words of comfort. She caught my eye and nodded slightly, no trace of the former hostility. Your mother-in-law is in good hands, I heard her say as I approached. Dr. Whitfield is the best. The surgery went perfectly. Afterward, I found Asher waiting in my office. Architectural plans spread across my desk. What's all this? Remember that coffee shop where we met? He grinned. It's for sale. I thought maybe we could renovate it, make it ours. A place where families can come together, where barriers break down over something as simple as spilled coffee. I looked at the plans. His design incorporated elements of both healing and connection, with a small garden reminiscent of Miriam's roses. Speaking of family, he said, reaching into his pocket, I have something to ask you. Wait, I interrupted, recognizing the look in his eyes. Before you do, are you sure? About all of this? About us? He took my hand, running his thumb over my knuckles. You know what I learned from all this? Sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into. And sometimes they merge into something even better. Even with your mother? Especially with her. She's trying, Nora. Really trying. Yesterday, she actually asked Sarah to visit, instead of guilt-tripping her about moving away. I laughed, remembering last week's family dinner, how Miriam had caught herself mid-control spiral and actually apologized. Small steps, but real ones. So he continued, about that question. My pager buzzed. Another emergency. Some things never change. Go, he said, understanding in his eyes. I'll be here when you're done. We have time. As I hurried down the corridor, I passed the coffee shop across the street where this all began. Through the window, I saw Lila and Miriam sharing a table, probably planning some surprise for the renovation. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But maybe healing is a drink best served hot, like coffee spilled on a stranger's shirt on a morning that changes everything. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, but getting better. And sometimes love isn't about winning or losing, but about finding the strength to try again, one sip at a time.